Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Cleantech. It's a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, September 6th, 2024. I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Ingold. Tim De Chant from TechCrunch will be joining us shortly, but for now I'm joined by Cleantech PR veteran Mike Casey of Tigercom. Mike, at the end of last episode, I think I said goodbye to you for a few weeks and didn't realize we had one more week until RE+, so here we are again.
Well, listeners will not know that Brian Mendez before the show was channeling his inner John Engel and throwing ageist tropes around at me, but we're going to set that aside. I have to say, I've been having a hard time getting over the fact you won't be with me for episode 50 at RE+, but it dawned on me this morning. It actually is probably for the best because you would be surrounded by new technologies and you would have to keep a straight face about actually thinking they're cool instead of going around with your kind of your snark and your disdain for anybody who's trying to do something new and is not yet established.
Oh no, that's the best part of trade shows is walking the floor and going, that's not real. Nice renderings, good pictures.
Cruel. You're a cruel man. Do you know that?
No, but you should have a lot of fun next week, and want to hear from all our listeners too. If you're heading to RE+, or you've got some stories to recommend for that episode, or you're recording two, I believe, Mike. So send those in to rew@clarionevents.com. We'll have a link in the episode description as well. And you are in good hands with my colleague Paul Gerke, so you'll have a lot of fun there.
Yes, sir.
Mike, story number one.
David Wallace Wells, who's going to come on the show at some point. He just doesn't know it. Don't bet
Another
me $5.
white whale.
Don't bet me $5. I'll take your money. What will we do with our free power? I love that headline. All right, John.
All right, so a lot here. So over the past decade, solar power experienced rapid expansion and reduced costs. Solar module costs in particular have dropped to about 10 cents per watt compared to a decade ago when it seemed impossible to reach $1 a watt. Over the next decade, the total cost of solar energy, including the price of panels and all related project expenses, is projected to be cut in half. These major cost reductions have already led to so much renewable energy deployment that in some of the nation's more mature markets like Texas and California, when wind and solar are at their peak, typically in the middle of the day, they have negative electricity prices. Consumers actually get paid to use electricity at certain times of day. And so we're, again, talking about those certain times of day. These dramatically declining costs have broader system impacts. But Mike, your thoughts here.
All right, solar power. It is already the cheapest form of energy on Earth, and it's the cheapest form of energy in human history. But Mr. Wallace Wells writes that it's tracking to become not just the cheapest, but it's the world's primary electricity source, which is pretty cool when you think about it. And so he basically invites us to engage in this thought exercise, and I say that in a good way, about what will the world and human civilization look like when power is free. It's kind of interesting. So innovating in the solar space is still crucial, but storing and transporting the power has become proportionally more important given that the fuel is free and the cost of installations has really come down. A new kind of long-distance transmission could take solar power from a sunny part of the world to another location where the sun is, and the sun's already set. And there's already a 3,000-mile transmission line that's being built both overland and underwater to carry power from a 30,000-acre solar farm in Australia all the way to Singapore. It'll provide a sixth of the city's electricity needs. So low electricity prices are also a great opportunity for the clean power sector to replace polluting fossil fuels in transportation and heavy industry as well. So sorry, solar critics, you're just going to be on the wrong side of history. John, story number two.
Yeah, this one's from Melody Peterson from the LA Times, titled, "How much water and power does AI computing demand? Tech firms don't want you to know." Mike, what do you know?
I know this is an interesting story, and if all Google searches used AI, they would consume as much electricity as the entire country of Ireland. And right now, we're not building enough renewables fast enough to meet the demand that creates the threat that these tech companies will walk away from their sustainability goals, which they've been a big driver of clean energy transition progress, and they could throw a lifeline to dirty energy. So experts are calling on tech companies to report to consumers how much energy they use with each AI-generated search. It's similar to how Google discloses to consumers how much carbon pollution their chosen flight will produce. If consumers are aware of their energy impact, the thinking is they might make more informed and better decisions. John, what do you think?
Yeah, so another issue here is that Google automatically produces an AI generated response after someone searches, and consumers don't have the option to turn that feature off. Google also failed to say how much AI was adding to its energy use without accurate data on Google's power use after incorporating AI. It's nearly impossible to know how much power Google AI is using and subsequently their impact on the environment. And that Google flight data analogy is instructive. It probably helps on the margins, but it's nothing close to a true solution in comparison to air travel. Similarly, I don't know why I made up that word, reducing AI use could help cut pollution, but ultimately we need to power data centers with clean energy to have a sustainable economy, regardless of how many searches people are doing. And it doesn't make any sense to count on the tech companies themselves to implement changes that'll reduce use of what they consider their most important product, which they've sunk trillions of dollars into. All right, Mike. Similarly, you can do this this third story.
Bianca Giacobone, didn't like that, got that right on the first one, from Latitude Media, titled "Local Opposition is Now a Leading Cause of Canceled Clean Energy Projects." John Engel.
Yeah, we talk about these two factors all the time, community opposition and interconnection. And community opposition taking the lead is really interesting. It's now on par with grid interconnection issues as the leading cause of clean energy project delays and cancellations, according to the Berkeley Lab. It's been described as one of, if not the largest challenge to widespread decarbonization. Developers are working to improve their community engagement efforts, but there's no clear industry standard on how to tackle this problem. I talked to Solve Energy CEO George Hirschman on the Factor This podcast last year about this issue. I believe you were in that episode as well, Mike. I almost forgot. I don't want to bury that.
Are you saying I'm forgettable?
Yeah,
John?
no, well, it nearly slipped my mind. But many developers have agreed that effective community engagement does lead to fewer project cancellations. The industry just needs to track down the most effective way to do it. Engaging the community early is essential, but engaging them too early, such as 3 years in advance, can cause misinformation to spread. Mike, you think about this, I think, every waking minute of your day. Your thoughts on this story?
Just about. Last summer, our director of community engagement, Ayelet Hines here at TigerCom, conducted in-depth interviews with 26 developers across 18 companies. And the tale of the tape is that renewable energy companies are using strategies that were inherited from more mature industries that forged them in a time when permitting was more akin to rubber stamping, what you can call low-friction permitting. We now have a high-friction permitting environment with online disinformation from the fossil fuel lobby, political polarization, and Facebook replacing traditional local news media as the new town square. And if our industry prioritizes developer conversations and tracking the most effective community engagement strategies, there is clearly a chance to turn this around and begin to form really an industry gold standard that chips away at this big barrier to the energy transition. John, our fourth story.
Yeah, we'll go through this one quickly so we can get to our reporter this week. This one's from Patrick Temple West, Amelia Pollard, and George Hammond from the Financial Times, titled "More Clean Tech Companies Fail as Fundraising Challenges Emerge." Mike, it's been a tough, I'd say, 3 to 4 months in the VC world. Your thoughts?
I think so.
Here?
Yeah, some clean tech businesses previously supported by investors and the IRA's tax credits are now closing or struggling to stay afloat due to high interest rates and delays in the federal tax credit support. We noted on this show the closing of SunPower and Swell Energy. These clean tech companies are failing to transition from their startup phase to commercial viability at scale, failing to get over the proverbial valley of death. There's also the challenge that so many clean tech companies are competing for the same pot of funding. John?
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about a startup here with our reporter in the next story, and maybe Tim De Chant has some thoughts on the so-called valley of death. But investment priorities have shifted to other sectors like AI, life sciences, and defense tech, making clean energy funding even harder to get. And these failures to transition from startup to mature company is not a good signal for investors that clean tech is worth funding. We need to find a way to bridge that gap, whether that be through new funding models or policy changes to support that quote-unquote missing middle. All right, Mike, our fifth story and our guest this week.
Tim De Chant from TechCrunch. He's our first timer on our show. Really fired up to have him. Oxylus Energy strikes a beautiful balance to make e-fuels for aviation and shipping. Tim,
Mike,
welcome to the
before
show.
you get to Tim, I'm going into this one with an open mind to new technology and innovation.
You just because you're in polite company and you don't want to display your routinely hateful attitudes to people trying new things. Let's just be clear what this is. Okay, fine.
What's up, Tim?
Welcome. And for people who haven't read your story, which we want them to do, what's the big takeaway?
Well, John, Mike, thanks for having me on. The big takeaway here, this is an early stage company, but they're devising a new and hopefully cheaper way to make green methanol, which can be used as a fuel for shipping. It can be used as a feedstock to create sustainable green aviation fuel. And it can be used as kind of a feedstock for a range of chemical processes that produce today what come from petrochemicals.
And Tim, this is, as you noted, a Yale spinout, so it does lend some credibility, and so that's why I'm going along for the ride here. Is it seems like some smart people are working on this challenge, and I think I love how you led into this story. You said the science is there, like we know this can work. Economically, it doesn't pencil today, and this company thinks that their approach can turn the tide on that direction. So walk me through the process and where it differs from other methods.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the case with a lot of clean tech, climate tech companies, right? By the time they get funded, the science seems to be fairly well proven. There's been some scientific publications behind it. Oxylus is no different. Where they differ from existing green methanol production is they skip the need for green hydrogen at the start. So a lot of companies need to take hydrogen and combine it with carbon dioxide to create methanol. Contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in it. And to decarbonize it, of course, they have to find that carbon source, which in many cases is carbon dioxide, ideally drawn from the atmosphere or some kind of polluting source. And then the hydrogen itself is another thing that needs to be decarbonized. A lot of hydrogen production today relies on what's known as steam reformation. So basically you take methane and heat it up, apply some steam to it, and that kind of cracks it apart and releases the hydrogen. That obviously also releases carbon dioxide in the process, which is what we're all trying to do. Green hydrogen has a premium because you have to run it through an electrolyzer. They're much more expensive to produce, much more expensive to run. And just supplying green hydrogen can add about 16% of the total cost of green methanol. So what these guys have done is they've devised a catalyst that essentially bypasses that need. So they're creating hydrogen at the same time that they're cracking apart carbon dioxide and water, and they're doing it in a way that doesn't kind of like tip the system out of balance, if that makes sense. So the way it was described to me is they're always kind of quote unquote fighting hydrogen production in the creation of green methanol. And so what they do is they, like I said, they found a way to balance hydrogen production in this system with the carbon dioxide kind of cracking and water cracking so that they can end up creating the green methanol as opposed to having an excess of hydrogen in this case.
Tim, what does your reporting indicate about the future of the infrastructure that's going to be needed to produce something like this at scale? Because I have to figure that's a big deal, and it so often is the under-discussed part of new technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any new technology like this, it's not insignificant. Their catalyst doesn't rely on anything too exotic. They're using cobalt, which is not incredibly widespread, but we are using it in lithium-ion batteries today, so there's a well-developed supply chain, and it's not relying on something like platinum, something that's very expensive. So a lot of it is going to be dependent on kind of building the cell, like the electrolyzers themselves so that you can split the water and carbon dioxide. But once you have that, then you can dump the liquid methanol into barrels, ship it around. We're familiar with that today. So there's less of a hurdle than something like green hydrogen, for example.
I'm very impressed and optimistic. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining us. And it looks like an interesting story, and it closes with the founders acknowledging that they now face a time and money problem, which so many startups do, but they said they're, laser focused on getting to that next level and deploying the technology. Time for our Clean Techer of the Week, Mike Casey. Nora Sokarski, press secretary at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. Nora recently graduated with her master's in political communications and shared her capstone project online, which analyzed Facebook messaging by opponents of land-based and offshore wind energy. So congratulations to Nora, our Clean Techer of the Week.
Nora is a woman after my own heart. Community engagement. See, she's on point, John.
Imagine, though, Nora, if you had to listen to Mike Casey talk about NIMBYism every single week for, the rest of your life, which seems like the cycle that I'm in. And,
she will have died and gone to heaven. Her. That's what she'll think. John Engel, we need to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, even though he was throwing shade at me before the show, Alex Peterson, Claire Quirwin for gathering these stories.
Yeah, and big thank you to Tim De Chant for joining us on this episode of This Week in Clean Tech. Please subscribe, give us feedback, and share those story recommendations. And you can read all of the articles we discussed this week, including Tim's, by clicking the links in the episode description. Mike, have fun at RE+. I will now see you in a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir. We'll miss you. Take care.